2,000 miles all the way. Get your kicks on Route 66. When it goes through St. Louis, Joplin, Missouri.
All right, you guys ready to be judged? You guys thought Eddie was kidding, right? No, really, are you ready to be judged? Yes? Okay, so here's the thing. I'm not going to judge you. I promise. But the people sitting around you might judge you, because we're going to take a little test this morning. How many of you hate annoying drivers? Yes. Okay, so here's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to take a test to see if you are the annoying driver. The only rule is you have to be honest. You guys ready? All right, here we go. Most annoying driving habits. Number 10, drivers who leave their turn signal on for miles. Hate this. I was driving to Deep Creek, to the McGill's house yesterday in the rain, and was driving on 75, and there's a guy in the right-hand lane with his left turn signal on, and we're already driving below the speed limit because it's raining. I'm thinking, okay, there's a slower guy in front of him, and at any time, he's going to go around and pass him, so I'm not going to pass that guy. Guess what? He never went anywhere. Never went anywhere. All right, number 9, women applying makeup or men shaving. I can honestly say that it has never crossed my mind to shave while I am driving. Now, I had a discussion with a couple of guys earlier about whether that actually meant like full-on shaving cream razor. I'm thinking it's probably an electric razor, not to make a mess in the car, because they're like, well, what do you do with the shaving cream? And I'm like, no, you guys are missing the point. So here's the thing. I don't know how many guys that I've ever seen do this, but ladies, let me just say that if you do this, we have a problem, because I know how much attention you put on yourself when you're applying makeup, and that means there's almost no attention to your driving, so that's not a good one. All right, number 8, moving on. Motorcyclists who drive down the middle of a lane between cars. Here's why this is annoying. It's because those of us that are in cars stuck in traffic are jealous because the motorcycle can break free. Am I right? Yeah. Number 7, road rage. Nobody likes a jerk on the road, right? I don't need to say anything more about that. None of us in here struggle with that one. Ha. Number 6, drivers who change lanes without signaling. This was the hardest lesson that I had teaching our teenage son when he first learned to drive. You gotta put your signal on, dude. You don't just, it's not just you out here, right? There's other people around. Number 5, obnoxious drivers who speed up to keep you from changing lanes. Yeah. People are admitting guilt already. Wow, you guys are brave. Number 4, drivers who weave through traffic to gain 1 or 2 car lengths. There's that person that's in and out of traffic, causing havoc. Everybody's panicking. They're doing all this extra work, and they're 50 feet in front of you. You're like, I hope you're happy. Hope you accomplished that, right? What you're going for? Yeah, just chill out. Number 3, pushy drivers who tailgate. Here's what I don't get about this one. People tailgate me. Usually it's because I don't have a choice in how fast I'm driving, because there are 2 cars in front of me driving side by side at the same speed, and they can't make up their mind who's going to pass each other, right? And so you getting on my butt, tailgating me, is going to make one of them up there change their mind as to what they're doing, right? No, usually it doesn't work that way. All right, number 2, slow drivers in the fast lane. Here's why this one bothers me. We take a lot of road trips. We have family that live all over pretty much all over the continent. And so we take a lot of road trips. And when I go somewhere, I like to beat my time, right? Last time it took me this much. This time I can shave 5 minutes off. I can shave 10 minutes off. But slow drivers in the left lane prohibit me from accomplishing my goal. And so that's why they are annoying to me. Number 1, most annoying driving habits, distracted drivers talking on cell phones. And you guys know what this is like, because most people that are in a phone conversation can't do anything else. You're in the grocery store and you're on the phone, you forget what aisle you're on, you forget what you're even looking for. There's nothing worse than going shopping with somebody that's on the phone and you're in a hurry and you're trying to get something done, because you might as well just stand there and wait for them to end the conversation, because they're completely oblivious to where they are. So why would you drive on your cell phone? And here's the reality. When we see somebody driving on their cell phone, they normally drive like they have no idea where they're going, because they probably don't have any idea where they're going because they don't remember. Am I right? All right, so moment of truth. How many of you scored a yes, I do that, to at least 7 of those? Ooh, we got a few honest people. All right, how many scored at least 5? All right, so I'm just going to be straight up honest in this service. We got some liars in here. But I will give you, if you are lying, I'll give you 1 out. Those of you that are sitting next to your spouse, and your spouse accuses you of some of those things, and you say that I don't do that, that's not me. I understand why you're not raising your hand, and I'm going to give you a pass, because it's going to make for a not-so-pleasant conversation on the way home today. Am I right? Right. All right, so you guys ready to move on? We're going to jump into week 2 of our road trip through the Bible. And last week we started in Deuteronomy. And Steve shared with us the commands that were given to the Israelites in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And that they were to love the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, and strength. And to have no other gods. And it was very clear that if they obeyed the commands that were given to them, things would go well. They would enter into the land that was promised to them. They would live a long and healthy life. They would prosper. And things would be good. But if they disobeyed, they would lose the blessings, and their enemies would rise up against them. And this was so important that they were instructed to share it with their children, their grandchildren, to write it down, to tell stories, to keep it present, keep it in front of them, remind them of who God was and what he had done for them. And so today we're going to move ahead 2 books to the book of Judges and learn that the children of Israel did pretty good with their obedience while Joshua was alive. And Joshua led them into the promised land, flowing with milk and honey as God had promised. And things were good. But after Joshua died, another generation rose up that did not know God or the things that God had done for them. And so they turned away from the God of their ancestors and followed the gods of the people around them. They disobeyed God's commands and fell into the hands of their enemies. Things were tough. They were oppressed. They no longer had the protection that God had promised them. And so we look at the book of Judges, which obviously is about judges, right? That was a pretty easy one. Do you guys agree? God would raise up a judge. The people would turn back to God and would be delivered from their enemies, their oppressors, and they would prosper and things would be good. And then the judge would die. And we forget what we learned, and we turn away from God to these other gods, and we practice our evil, wicked ways and do whatever we want. Then our enemies come and oppress us and overtake us. There was a cycle that just kept repeating. And so in Judges chapter 6, we're going to go there in just a minute, but we find things not going very well for the Israelites. Israel had disobeyed God, and so he gave them into the hand of the Midianites for 7 years. And because of the strong oppression of the Midianites, they would hide in the cracks and the crevices and clefts of the mountains or in caves and somewhere where they could kind of be out of sight and be unseen and sheltered. The Midianites were a nomadic people, so they kind of wandered around and traveled and set up camp, and then they'd move on. But when the growing season came, it seemed that the Midianites would show up to where the Israelites were. When harvest time arrived, so did the Midianites, with an appetite for everything that the Israelites possessed. And they would plunder and steal the food they had grown. They would destroy and trample on things. They would let their animals graze on anything that was left over. And then when they left town, they would take the animals that belonged to the Israelites with them. And so there's a movie that was done in recent years that I thought was a little bit of a good visual for what that might have been like. So check this out.
Hopper.
So where is it?
Where's my food?
Isn't
it up there?
What?
The food was in a leaf sitting on
Excuse
top.
me?
Are you sure it's not up there?
Are you saying I'm stupid?
No.
Do I look stupid to you? Let's just think about the logic, shall we? Let's just think about it for a second. If it was up there, would I be coming down here to your level looking for it?
Why am I even talking to you? You're not the queen. You don't smell like the queen.
She's learning to take over from me, Hopper.
Oh, I see. Under new management. So it's your fault.
No, it wasn't me. It wasn't.
First rule of leadership. Everything is your fault.
But
It's a bug-eat-bug world out there, princess. One of those circle of life kind of things. Now let me tell you how things are supposed to work. The sun grows the food, the ants pick the food, the grasshoppers eat the food.
And the birds eat the grasshoppers.
It seems to me that you ants are forgetting your place.
So let's double the order of food.
no, but.
We'll be back at the end of the season when the last leaf falls. You ants have a nice summer.
So there's nothing like a good animated movie to illustrate something, right? So the Israelites were desperate. They cried out to God. They're tired of the oppression. They're tired of not having anything to eat. He sends a prophet to them, and he basically tells them, listen, God has delivered you over and over. He's given you instructions. He's told you what to do. You didn't listen again, and now you've put yourself in this mess. That's my paraphrase of what he said. So after the prophet comes, then God raises up a judge named Gideon. Gideon puts an army together to go up against the Midianites. The Midianite army is 135,000 men. Gideon's army, 32,000 men. We already see a problem with the story, right? They're outnumbered 4-1. And God says to Gideon, you got too many men. And Gideon's probably thinking, wait a minute, what do you mean? I know that you're smarter than I am, but I can do math, and we're outnumbered 4-1. What do you mean we have too many? I think they have too many, right? And God says, this is what I want you to do. I want you to tell the men that are afraid that they're free to go. They can go home to their families. And so Gideon tells the men, hey, listen, guys, if you're afraid, you are relieved of your duties, no hard feelings. You can go home to your families and be out of this thing. 22,000 of them go home. Gideon's left with 10,000 men. Quick math, we're now outnumbered 13-1. Things are getting better. God says, still too many. And so God tells Gideon to take the men down to the stream, and he separates them according to how they drink water. Now, I've never heard of this in any kind of military training before, but God doesn't do things the way that we always do things or the way that we expect. And so he separates them the way that they drink water, and Gideon's left with 300 men. I don't know how many did the math that quick, but they're outnumbered now 450-1. Impossible odds. But see, here's the key to that. There will be no doubt when the battle is over that God fought for Israel. There will be no ability to brag and boast about how great a size of an army we have, how big, how strong, how big our numbers are. There will be no doubt that God fought for them. And so Gideon leads them into battle with trumpets and torches and glass jars. They go down at night, they break their jars, blow their trumpets and shout, and in all the chaos and confusion, God causes the Midianites to turn their swords on each other, and they kill each other. And the rest of them flee. And then Gideon's army chases those who flee, and the Bible says that they completely routed the Midianite army. Now Israel is once again free from their oppressors. Sounds like a pretty good story, right? Sounds like Gideon was the right man for the job. God used him. God showed up. God won the battle for Israel. But what I want to do for the rest of our time together is I want to back up in the story, and I want to look at Gideon and who he really was. And so we're going to go to Judges chapter 6, starting at verse 11. And I'm not going to have these on the screen, so I would really like if you would turn in your Bibles to Judges 6 or on your smartphone or your tablet or whatever you got. If you don't have a Bible with you, there are Bibles under the seat you're sitting in. And if you don't own one, please take that home with you. That is our gift to you. We feel like it is very important for people to have the Word of God and the ability to read that whenever they want. And so those are our gift to you. But if you would turn to Judges chapter 6, verse 11, and that's page 169 in our Bibles under the seats, if that's what you use. And so we're going to key in on Gideon, the hero who led an army of 300 into battle against 135,000. But in all honesty, Gideon is the unlikely hero, as was Flick in A Bug's Life, if you saw the rest of the movie. Gideon wasn't ready to be the hero. He wasn't ready to be a fearless leader. And so here is the moral of the story, the point that I want you to get today, and we're going to break it down as we go. But the main point of this, the moral is this: God most often uses the unlikely person to be the hero. God uses unlikely people to be the heroes. And so we're going to learn 7 lessons to back that up from the life of Gideon. So let's begin at verse 11. It says, the angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah. That's Ophrah, not Oprah, just in case you're wondering. It's not a typo. That belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Now, here's what's interesting about this. You don't thresh wheat in a winepress. You press grapes into wine in a winepress. If you're going to thresh wheat, you do it out in the field, out in the open, in the air, so that you throw it up and the wind does the work and separates the wheat from the chaff. But here's what was happening is Gideon was doing this in secret. He was doing it in hiding in the winepress, out of the sight of the Midianites. And he is hiding to protect a little bit of grain. Doesn't sound like the guy that we read about at the end of the story. Verse 12, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. Mighty what? Who are you talking to, right? I'm sure Gideon's thinking, you're not talking to me. You must be talking to somebody else. Because this guy does not look like a mighty warrior. This guy looks like a coward. Maybe a guy, if we don't want to go that far, maybe a guy that's lacking a little bit of courage, just kind of insecure. But here's the thing. God saw something in Gideon that Gideon didn't see. Because he wasn't acting like a mighty warrior. But God saw something different. And here is lesson number 1 that we learn from Gideon's life story is this. God sees what we don't. God sees what we don't. God saw what Gideon would be, not what he was at the moment. The same is true of us. God doesn't see us as we are right now, but he sees us as who we will be. So Gideon responds to God with some sarcasm or doubt, depending on how you read the inflection of his tone. In verse 13, he says, pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. The Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength that you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? God didn't ask Gideon to go in someone else's strength. He asked him to go in the strength that he had. Lesson number 2 is this. God uses what we have. God uses what we have. See, God knew who he was dealing with Gideon, and he knew his capacity, he knew his ability, he knew his strength. And he said, I want you to go and I want you to use what you have, but I'm going to use you. God knows who we are. He knows what our strengths are. He knows what we're capable of. And he doesn't say, I want you to go and do what somebody else did. I want you to go and be like this person or your older brother or sister and do their thing. He says, I want you to go and I want you to use what you have because I've given it to you. Gideon then responds to God with excuses. Pardon me, my Lord, Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Manasseh was not the strong tribe. Manasseh was the weak tribe, and he came from a weak family in the weak tribe, and he was the weakest and the least of his family. He was full of excuses. The Lord answered him and said, I will be with you, and I will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. God brushed the excuses aside, and he promised what would happen and what he would do. Lesson number 3 is this. God is bigger than our excuses. God is bigger than our excuses. God was bigger than the excuses that Gideon could give to him, and he's bigger than ours. And we all have lots of them, right? At this point, God's been very clear to Gideon that he's called him and what he wants him to do. He calls him a mighty warrior. He tells him he's sending him. He tells him, this is what you're going to do, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what it looks like. But that's not enough for Gideon. So Gideon asked for a sign. Verse 17, Gideon replied, if now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you. And the Lord said, I will wait until you return. Gideon went inside, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. Now, Gideon just wasn't gone for 5 minutes. I don't know whether he killed and dressed the goat, but he cooked the goat, made a soup out of it, baked some bread, and tells God, you just wait here while I do all this, okay? And he comes back and he brings it to him. In verse 20, the angel of God said to him, take the meat and unleavened bread, place them on this rock and pour out the broth. And Gideon did so. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread with the tip of the staff that was in his hand. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread. And the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die. So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it the Lord is peace. To this day, it stands in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. God gives Gideon a sign, and he comes to a realization of who he's really talking to. Now, I've started a lot of fires in my day, camping, teaching my boys how to burn yard trash. And as a kid, I don't know, 9, 10, 11 years old, I used to like to light fires just because I just liked it. And I would go to vacant fields and property, and I would start fires, and I would see what would burn and what wouldn't burn. And I actually had parents who didn't want their kids hanging out with me because I did those things. Now, I was a pastor's kid, and so you kind of have that stigma sometimes that people think you're a pastor's kid, you're evil, and they don't want their kids hanging out with you. So I just figured, let me just give them a reason to really not want their kids to hang out with me, right? But I can tell you this, in all the times that I've started fires, I've lit all kinds of stuff on fire. I have never been able to get a rock to light on fire. The fact that fire came up from a rock is a pretty impressive sign. Gideon knew at that moment that, you know what, I'm dealing with God here. This is real. This is for real. This is the real deal. And so God reveals himself to Gideon, and then at this point, God gives him his first assignment in verse 25. He said, that same night, the Lord said to him, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Then build a proper kind of altar to the Lord your God on the top of this height. Using the word of the Asherah pole that you cut down, offer the second bull as a burnt offering. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. Second time that we hear that Gideon's afraid. First time, he's hiding out in the wine press. Now God tells him to do something. He says, okay, I'll do it, but I'm afraid, and so I'm going to do it at night because I don't want anybody to see me do this. Lesson number 4 for us is this. God uses us in spite of our weaknesses. God uses us in spite of our weaknesses. God used Gideon in spite of his weakness. He had a big weakness of fear. And God told him to do something, and so he did, but he kind of did it his way. He did it in light of his weakness and the struggle that he had. But here's the thing about God. God doesn't beat us up because of our weakness. God knows what our weakness is. He's not surprised. You know, if you have a child that's afraid of something, you don't make fun of your child because they're afraid of something. You try and work with them through that fear. And that's what God does with Gideon. He works through the weakness. He uses him in spite of the weakness. He doesn't make fun of him. He doesn't beat him up. You know, we read Bible stories all the time of people that had weakness. I can't think of a single story where somebody didn't have a weakness. David was a lowly shepherd boy. the least, the youngest, the smallest in his family, becomes a king, has a problem with adultery and killing somebody's husband. Moses stuttered and was a murderer and complained and asked God for sign after sign, and he complained. Peter denied Jesus. He doubted when Jesus asked him to walk on the water. He couldn't keep his foot out of his mouth. God still used him. God uses people in spite of their weaknesses. So, next morning, people in the village are obviously upset that somebody's been messing with their gods and their altars. The people find out that Gideon was responsible, and they all agree that he must die for what he's done. Now, here's something that's interesting, because the altars to Baal and the Asherah pole actually belonged to Gideon's father. Gideon's father had built these things. But in this moment, the rightful thing is for Gideon to die. Joash has a choice to make. And finally, Joash makes a stand for God, and he makes a stand for Gideon. He defends his son, and he says, if Baal really is a god, let Baal defend himself. And the people of the town actually renamed Gideon Jerub-Baal, which means let Baal contend with him. Let Baal deal with him. So there's a pivotal moment here where, you know what, if Baal really is this powerful God, he's about to take Gideon out. But guess what? Nothing happens to Gideon. Why? Because their false gods weren't really powerful as they claimed. And so there starts to be this awareness in the village of who God is, I believe, from Gideon's example. So at this point, God has spoken to Gideon. He's refuted his excuses. He's assured him. He's given him a sign. He's protected him. Gideon's ready to go on, right? Not quite. Gideon responds to God like this in verse 36. He said, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said. And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Gideon gets his sign, or another sign, shall we say. But then he thinks, wait a minute. Maybe that's not that big of a sign. Maybe that really could happen. Maybe the ground could dry faster than the fleece. So let me try this again. Let me ask for one more sign. And at this point, Gideon knows that he's pushing his boundaries. He knows that he's testing God. Because in verse 39, he says this to God. He says, do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. He knows I'm really pushing my limits here, but you know what? I'm going to trust God. You've done a lot, but I just need a little bit more. So please don't be angry, but I'm going to ask for one more thing. Allow me one more test with the fleece. This time, make the fleece dry and let the ground be covered with dew. That night, God did so. Only the fleece was dry and the ground was covered with dew. So how many signs did Gideon really need? I mean, honestly, fire coming up out of a rock is not enough. I'm thinking, this is me. God should be thinking, or would be thinking, it would be if it was me for sure. Okay, haven't I done enough? Haven't I proved myself enough to this guy? Haven't I told him enough times? Maybe he's not the guy. Maybe I should move on and find somebody else that gets it a little quicker, that once or twice is enough, right? But that's not how God does things. Lesson number 5 is this: God is more patient than we are. God is way more patient than we are. The things that I get impatient with myself about and how slow a learner I am sometimes, God doesn't feel the same way about me. The other people around us that get impatient, God doesn't treat us that way because we don't get it the first time, or sometimes the second, or the third, or however many times it takes. I know that as a parent, I get really impatient with my kids because I told you this, and I told you again, and I told you again, why? But God doesn't treat us that way. God doesn't treat us that way. God is way more patient than we are, and God is way more patient than other people are with us. God was patient with Gideon in answering his questions and proving himself. He gave him what he needed. So we move on through the story to the paring down of the army, which we've already talked about, and we get ready for war. Okay, so let's jump down to chapter 7, if you would. Chapter 7, verse 9. During that night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up and go down against the camp because I'm going to give it into your hands." Have we heard this before? We've heard it 2, 3, 4 times by now. God has told Gideon what to do, and he's told him what he's going to do and what's going to happen. I'm going to give you the camp of Midian into your hands. But here's the thing. God knows he's dealing with Gideon. This might not quite be enough, right? Gideon's got this little problem with believing me, with trusting, with being afraid. So he adds these words, verse 10. If you are afraid to attack, which we know he probably was, right? Go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outposts of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled into the valley as thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling his friend a dream. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." God has told Gideon repeatedly, "I'm going to give you the Midianites. I'm going to deliver you. I'm going to give them into your hand." Now, God goes and tells the Midianites, the enemies, what he's going to do. He even tells them who's going to lead the charge against them. He makes it really clear. So here's the thing. Let's watch what happens to Gideon next, after Gideon hears all this. Verse 15. When Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and worshiped. He returned to the camp of Israel and called out, "Get up! The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." Dividing the 300 men into 3 companies, he placed trumpets and empty jars into the hands of all of them with torches inside. "Watch me," he told them. "Follow my lead. When I get to the edge of the camp, do exactly as I do. When I and all who are around me blow our trumpets, then from all around the camp, blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon." We see Gideon here step up and lead in boldness. Doesn't seem like the guy that was threshing wheat in the winepress, the guy that went and tore down the altars by night, the guy that had to sneak into the camp and listen because he was afraid. It's not the guy that was complaining and making excuses. See, here's the key. God grew Gideon into the hero. God grew Gideon for the job that he had prepared for him. Lesson number 6 is that God makes the hero. God makes the hero. My kids were watching Megamind the other day, and I've never seen it. I just was in there for a few minutes and heard this quote by Megamind, the villain, not the hero. But he said this. He said, "Heroes are not born. They're made." Now, that's a cartoon quote, and I don't know. That could actually be true. And the more I think about it, it probably is true. Because here's what I know. We are not now what we will be. Gideon was not in the beginning what he would be. Of all the people that we think of as heroic, I don't know that any of them were born thinking that this task that's going to come for me, I'm ready for it. I don't have any weaknesses to deal with. I've got everything I need. I'm good. When the moment arises, I'm going to save the day, right? I don't think so. I think heroes are made. They're grown. I don't think they're born. And here's what I know. We all have things that happen in life that prepare us for bigger opportunities. Gideon had little steps along the way that grew him to be that leader, that bold man that didn't say, "I'm going to do this at night." He said, "No, I'm going to go out and I'm going to lead the charge, and you're going to watch what I do, and you're going to follow me. And I'm going to do this with boldness rather than timidity and fear and kind of hide." God led Gideon through his development until the right time when he was ready. Hebrews chapter 11 is known as the faith chapter. And there are stories of all kinds of ordinary men and women who did great things for God because of their faith. And so we read of all these stories, and we come down to verse 32, and this is what the writer of Hebrews says, Hebrews 11:32. "And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Now, when I read this and think of all the people that are listed in Hebrews chapter 11, and we've just looked at Gideon's journey and the life and how he got there, I don't know if Gideon belongs in the Faith Hall of Fame. I mean, I didn't see a lot of faith. I saw a lot of doubt. I saw a lot of question. I saw a lot of excuse making. But does he really belong there? And the truth is that if we were to look at all the men and women that are listed there, we go back and really examine their story. They're full of weakness. They're full of questions. They're full of doubt. They're full of excuses. But here they are, having done great things because of their faith. Gideon's faith was not without doubt and questions. And his obedience was not always confident, but it was obedience. And here's what I see about faith. Faith does not require that we see or understand everything. It only requires obedience. Gideon's obedience was imperfect, but nonetheless it was obedience. And because of it, here he is in Hebrews chapter 11, being known as a man of faith. Why? Not because he got it all together. Not because he was never afraid. Not because he was always bold, forward thinking, but because he was obedient. Lesson number 7 is this: God simply requires obedience. God simply requires obedience. God doesn't require that we know everything, that we understand everything, that we see everything. He just asks if you obey. If you trust me, you obey and you take one step, I'll take care of everything else. All I need you to do is what I ask you to do. And so what does this have to do with us? This is all good and fine for Gideon, but what does this really have to do with me? Ephesians 2:10 says this: "For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." This doesn't say that Gideon was God's handiwork, or David, or Moses, or any of those guys were God's handiwork. It says we are God's handiwork. It's plural, all-inclusive. We are created to do good works in Christ Jesus, which God prepared in advance for us to do. So here's the thing. Nobody's exempt from this. God has something for all of you and for me. Something that he's prepared for us to do. And here's the key. What he's asked me to do, none of you can do. And what he's asked you to do, I can't do. Because he's created something for you to do based on your personality, based on your gifts, based on your strengths, based on your experience, and based on who you are. And whatever that thing it is for you to do, nobody else can do it. But at the same time, you see God asking somebody else, calling somebody else to do something, guess what? You can't do their thing. You can't step into their story and be them. You can't step into their story and be the hero, be the one that accomplishes whatever God's calling them to do. It has to be your own. And nobody can do it for you. We all have things that God designed us to do, and we're all unlikely. We all have weaknesses, excuses, doubts. We compare ourselves to other people, and we disqualify ourselves based on what they can do. Earl Nightingale was a motivational speaker many years ago, and he was quoted as saying this: "Your destiny is not determined by your conditions, but by your decisions." Your destiny is not determined by your conditions, but by your decisions. And here's what I know. Your past does not determine your future unless you let it. And we can come up with all kinds of excuses as to the family we were born into, or the area that we were born into, or the job that we have, or the amount of debt that we're in, or I just can't do this and I can't do that. Well, guess what? All of those things don't determine what your future is. Your conditions now, your conditions in the past don't determine your destiny. Your decisions do. All the things that you do or have done don't keep you from a relationship with God, because he's already made provision for that. You just have to make the decision. I heard a story this week of a man who had 2 sons, 8, 10 years old approximately, and the man had gotten himself in trouble. He didn't always do things on the up and up, and got into some financial trouble. And so he decided the only way out of this was to rob a convenience store. And so he went in with a gun. He pulled the gun on the clerk, robbed the store. The gun went off, and he shot and killed the clerk. He went away to prison for the rest of his life. There was a family friend who kept a check on the boys, and as they grew up, every few years he would check in with them. And these two young men are now in their 30s, living completely different lives. One of them was a successful sales manager. He was the regional manager and had a great marriage, great kids, family, was successful, did things for other people and gave, and was the picture of success. The other brother just couldn't stay out of drugs, got himself in trouble, and he also decided to rob a convenience store. He took a gun with him, and at some point there was an altercation. The gun went off. It did not hit the clerk, did not kill anybody, but he went to jail for robbery and attempted murder. And so this family friend that continued to visit them comes to this point in their lives, and he pays both of them a visit. And he decides, you know what, I'm going to ask them both the same question. He went to the young man that was in jail, and he said, how did you get here? How did you end up like this? And the young man said, with a father like mine, how could I not? He went to the brother who was a successful sales manager and had a great family, and he said to him, how did you end up here? How did your life get here? He gave the same answer as his brother. He said, with a father like mine, how could I not? One viewed his father as a role model of the way that life is and how things should be done, and he followed that path. The other one viewed his father as a role model of how not to do things, and he went a different direction. They both had the same conditions, same father, same choices, but they made different decisions. Your conditions, where you start from, doesn't determine who you are, who you'll be, or where you're going to go, but your decisions do. And so there are things that God asks all of us to do, some big, some little. Some of the little things prepare us for bigger things in life. What is God asking of you? The lessons we just learned from Gideon are true for us. God has already given you what you need. He's given you everything you need. He's not going to ask you to do something that you're not capable of. God's bigger than your weaknesses. It doesn't matter if you're afraid. It doesn't matter if you've made mistakes. It doesn't matter if you come from a broken home. God's bigger than our weaknesses. He has answers for all of our excuses. And I'm good at coming up with excuses. I don't know about you. God is patient and will grow you into the person that you need to become. All he asks for is your obedience. So the question that we end with today is this: will you let God use you to be an unlikely hero? Who is it that needs someone to step up to make a difference, to be a hero? Maybe there's an individual. Maybe it's your family. Maybe there's a group of people. I don't know. Maybe you need to do it for you. But are you willing to let God use you to be an unlikely hero in your story, in someone else's story, and make a difference in your home, make a difference in a community? It only takes obedience. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for the story of Gideon, the book of Judges, and God, for the example and the lessons that we can learn. And I thank you that you love each one of us, no matter where we are. And God, whether we are fully committed and devoted to you, or whether we're in a place where we're wrestling and we have doubts and we have questions, and sometimes slow to get it. Or God, maybe we're in a place where we're not even sure that we trust you, let alone know you. I thank you that it doesn't matter where we are, that you love us just the same. And that God, where we are today, what our struggles are, is not where we will be if we will just obey. And so God, right now, I just ask you to begin to speak to hearts. And that I know that there are some that are here today, or maybe watching online, that God, you've already asked them to do something. You've been clear. and they've made excuses, and they've thought they're not qualified, they're not good enough. But God, you are bigger. And God, you are patient. And for those of us that have resisted and struggled, you're not done with us because you are patient to grow us. And maybe there's some people here today that, God, they're hearing from you for the first time. And I just pray that you would begin to reveal yourself in a new and a fresh way. God, that you would share with us what it is that you would have us to do. And for us to be able to rest in the confidence that you've got this, and that whatever it is that you ask us to do, you are faithful to complete the task, to be with us. I just pray that you would help us to simply obey you, to step out, to obey and to follow your lead, whatever it is. And thank you for that. I ask you to bless each person that's here today. May we know and rest in the good that you think towards us and the good that you have for us. I pray that you would use us to be the unlikely hero in someone's story. And thank you for that in Jesus' name.